Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sonia Lowen and I am the Chairman of Debating SA. We are appreciative that we have been given permission to conduct our grand finals here in this august Chamber of Parliament. Debating provides a formal framework in which students learn to conduct themselves in a civil and courteous manner to each other, the adjudicator, and their opposition, and to abide by the rules. The ability to master anything in life is a challenge. Debating presents a challenge to students. It challenges their research and reasoning skills, how to organise and formulate arguments, how to communicate more clearly, and how to examine and consider a case that might be, at times, in opposition to their own personal views. Debating builds character. It requires fortitude, diligence and motivation. In order to have made it to the grand finals, the debaters here today have had to be determined, self-disciplined, dedicated and hard-working, and I commend them for these attributes. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2023 Senior Division Debating SA Grand Final. My name is Georgia Warren and I am the chairman of this debate. The timekeeper is Toby Lloyd. The topic of this debate is that in light of recent events, that the government should re-nationalise Qantas. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Aberfoyle Park High School. The negative team seated to my left is from Pembroke School. This grand final debate will be judged by a panel of 5 adjudicators who are Ilya Aidman, Jonathan Pasalidis, Liliana France, Paul Hoadley and Sophie Sabo. The speaking time of this debate is 8 minutes. A single warning bell will sound at 7 minutes and a double bell will sound at 8 minutes. A continuous bell will ring 30 seconds after the final bell. Please switch off your mobile phones and other electronic devices. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Conon Kaboy.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for today's debate is that in light of recent events, the government should re-nationalise Qantas. Before I move on to my team's case, I will be providing the definition for this topic. First, the government refers to the federal government of Australia. Next, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, nationalise means to remove from private ownership and place under government control. And we extend this definition to re-nationalise, highlighting the fact that Qantas was once under government control. Qantas, as outlined by the Centre for Aviation, is the national airline of Australia that operates domestic and international air transportation services for passengers and cargoes. We define the phrase "in light of" according to the Oxford Dictionary as taking into consideration. And finally, although the roots of Qantas's scandals date back to its initial privatisation, we will be referring to recent events as the scandals which have occurred since the cost-cutting program was implemented by former CEO Alan Joyce at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. These include, but are not limited to, selling of cancelled flights, refusing to supply refunds, and the largest illegal sacking of workers, all as reported by The Guardian. Overall, we define the topic to be that considering the scandals which have occurred since the cost-cutting program was introduced, we should return Qantas, the national airline of Australia, under government control as it once was in the past. We, the affirmative team, believe this statement to be true. Now onto our team case. As your first speaker this afternoon, I will be discussing the economical benefits that re-nationalising Qantas will have on our tourism industry, and that it will ensure they are liable for their decisions and actions. Our second speaker will then convince you that re-nationalising Qantas will promote our national identity and ensure that the national interests of Australia are protected. And our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team case. Now today, ladies and gentlemen, I will be taking you through 2 crucial benefits of nationalising Qantas. My first point is that re-nationalising Qantas would contribute to the restoration of our tourism industry and allow for economic growth of our nation. Nowadays, privately owned airlines such as Qantas have been seen to prioritise the profits of their own company over less lucrative regional routes, even though Qantas was originally established to travel the long distances within the difficult Australian environment, as outlined by the National Museum of Australia. Qantas confirmed to Tourism Central Australia that they are planning to cut another 30,000 regional seats during the 2023 peak tourism season, on top of the 60,000 seats which have already been lost in only 1 year. This means that regional air services will decrease to approximately 60% of what it was at the beginning of 2022, heavily impacting the tourism industry, and the effects are already becoming apparent. According to Tourism SA, the number of regional tourists last year was half of what it was in 2021, which is particularly alarming as it means the values in 2022 were lower than what it was during the time when majority of lockdowns and restrictions were in place in 2021. By re-nationalising Qantas, essential air services to remote and regional areas will be preserved, and this is simply because detriments to the tourism industry will have a direct consequence on the country's economy. As a private corporation, Qantas is not liable, nor do they have any concern for the nation's economy, as long as their profits are maintained by shareholders and more expensive international flights. However, if they are put under government control, they have no other choice but to reinstate regional airlines to sustain their regional tourism, which will lead to statistically and economically significant increases in regional growth. A study by the Transportation Research Board found that a 50% increase in the air passenger growth rate leads to an average increase of 3.2% in the annual growth of per capita income and a 5.5% increase in the annual rate of employment. And yes, you may argue that the decline in the tourism industry is impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but this in fact further reinforces the vitality of re-nationalising Qantas. After the damage which COVID-19 has caused to the Australian tourism industry, there could not be a more crucial time to put Qantas back into the hands of the government, who will operate within the best interest of the general public and nation's economy, marking a fundamental step in restoring our tourism industry. My second point for today is that re-nationalising Qantas will ensure they take accountability for their acts. Let's revisit just some of Qantas's recent events. First, the fake tickets. As reported by countless news articles, including The Guardian and News.com, within 3 months, Qantas continued to advertise and take money for tickets of 8,000 flights, which were already cancelled. This is worth about 1.5 million tickets, of which many are still waiting to be refunded for, according to the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or ACCC. Next is the illegal sacking of 1,700 ground staff. This month, Qantas had lost their appeal to the High Court, where a full court decision was unanimously upheld for laying off 1,700 staff at 10 airports in November 2020, according to the High Court of Australia. What's more, Qantas states to The Guardian that it acknowledges and accepts the High Court's ruling. They explain that it took the outsourcing decision in a bid to, quote, improve its ability to survive and ultimately recover during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it could not be clearer from Qantas's mindless plans and own quotes, as well as the resulting consequences, that they only care about the survival and profits of their own company and are completely ignorant of the impacts this may have on their workers, customers, and our nation. However, the most outrageous fact about all of this is that these cost-cutting programs were being implemented all whilst Qantas was making a record-breaking profit of $2.47 billion. Within this fortune, Alan Joyce was paid $5.5 million in wages last year, of which $3.3 million were bonus shares, and hurriedly resigned amidst these piling scandals with $21.4 million. And these record profits are off the back of ballooning prices for flights during our cost of living crisis. Instead of that money going to CEO bonuses and resignation pocket money, it should be going to paying workers, improving their conditions, and making flights cheaper for everyday Australians. And at this point, the only way to do this is by re-nationalising Qantas, forcing them to operate with a higher degree of public accountability. By re-nationalising Qantas, instead of solely focusing on their profits, this will shift to considering the best interest of the general public, ensuring that decisions about pricing, wages and service quality are made with the broader population in mind. According to The Guardian, when Qantas was fully government-owned until 1993, it maintained the best safety record in the world, had a fully unionised workforce and some of the best safety standards in the world. And that is the standard a re-nationalised Qantas will return to. So, in conclusion, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we, the Affirmative team, believe that in light of recent events, the government should re-nationalise Qantas, as it will restore our tourism industry and ensure they take accountability for their actions, providing secure services and jobs and returning Qantas to the standard and reputation it once held. Because as a country, we need to choose people over profits. Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Serafina Zhang.
Good afternoon, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that in light of recent events, the government should re-nationalise Qantas, and we, the negative team, would like to assert that this statement is false. As the first speaker, I'll be discussing the inherent instability behind renationalisation and the detrimental effects this would have on Qantas as a company and its associated shareholders. I will further elaborate on the misconception of a government with prosperity and safety. Our second speaker, Spiridon, will reinforce the notion that nationalisation restricts innovation and the profitable nature of Qantas currently. Our third speaker, Luca, will summarise our argument and address the opposition's claims. I would like to begin by elaborating on the Affirmative team's definition. We would like to include in the definition of recent events as events which have had a direct relationship or impact on the business of Qantas and its shareholders. We acknowledge that the coronavirus, the pandemic, and thus the economic consequences, particularly in the aviation industry of this global affiliation, are counted as such recent events, as mentioned by the Affirmative team. However, we would also like to encompass the 2014 Qantas Sales Amendment Bill, where the company requested legislative amendment to the Qantas Sales Act of 1992, which they believe did not keep them on a level playing field as Virgin Airlines. In addition, we also acknowledge the recent events as encompassing the Australian Competition and Consumers Commissioner's lawsuit. We acknowledge that this was on behalf of Virgin Airlines and the rest of the airlines in Australia, rather than a government-hosted thing. We define the government as the Australian government body, including all members of the House of Representatives and all other government associates, such as the Treasurer. We acknowledge that currently, the Labor Party possesses a majority of seats as of the 2022 elections. However, we would like to assert that in our definition of the government, we do not place temporal restrictions limiting the government to the current Labor government. We understand the fluid nature of politics and thus define government as both present and future administrations. We would like to define should as a catalyst for the best and most effective course of action for the interests of the Australian population and the associates of Qantas and Qantas as a company. Therefore, we would like to emphasise that in the definition of the term should, it does not directly relate to the benefits of the Australian government and administration, but rather speaks for the identification for the most potent and efficacious course of action in the objective and realistic lens for the Qantas company and its associates. This speaks not just currently, but also expanding into the profitable foundation for Qantas's future. We additionally would like to define Qantas as a synecdoche to represent the greater parent entity of Qantas Airways Limited, a private corporate group, and operates under the two brands of Qantas and Jetstar Group Airlines. As a private company, shareholders or stakeholders own the company's outstanding shares, which represent a residual portion of the company's assets. Following the winning of the 2014 bill, Qantas is thus categorised as an Australian international airline, permitting its carrying of people and goods under a bilateral agreement, an agreement in which Australia and a foreign country permit the carriage of air. This furthermore allows for its limitation on foreign ownership to be increased from 25% to 49%. Before I begin my points for today, I would like to address the first speaker's points. The first speaker has tried to tell you that the restoration of the tourism industry is looking bleak in the future. However, The current privatised structure of Qantas and its programs dispute this notion of the reduced tourism. Rather, Qantas saw an increase in profit post-COVID, with over 2,000 million earned in 2023 compared to pre-COVID earnings of approximately 1,500 million. Tourism is also thriving post-COVID, with over 2 times interest in domestic travel and an additional 80% increase in international travel interest. This, as stated by Qantas, thus proves that Qantas is thriving along with the tourism sector as a whole. The government standard, however, should not be identified with being safe, as the first speaker elaborated on in identifying the return of Qantas to its pre-privatised state. I'll be elaborating on the misconception of government and safe in my points for today. One of the most salient global institutional reforms has been the cyclical nature of privatisation and re-nationalisation, and this is thus reflected in the unstable institutional reforms, creating implications of a government's inability to commit to a given policy. Furthermore, nationalisation may commit future governments to actions which contradict party beliefs, thus creating potential for future disputes. This then perpetuates the conundrum in creating an easily reversible policy to compromise for future political change, or creating a stagnant policy which compromises the dynamic nature of politics for stability. The re-nationalisation, and I emphasise re-nationalisation, of Qantas would perpetuate this ineffective cycle. A steadfast and proven structure is paramount in a company, and incessant alterations undermine the foundation that fosters stability and henceforth success. It is redundant to create politics which will project future conflict, as this is not in the best interest. Following the United Kingdom's push for nationalisation by the Labour government in the mid-1900s, the Treasury suffered a net loss from this policy, as nationalisation limited future profit. Furthermore, its monopolisation of industries, such as civil aviation, decreased competitiveness, and the subsequent lack of companies existing as purely individual entities resulted in struggles in selling firms back to private shareholders. Similarly, in the late 1900s, French industries such as airlines were nationalised. Following its completion, 25% of the Paris stock market had disappeared. A few years later, when the companies were privatised yet again, the number of shares requested by investors exceeded the number available up to 65 times. The privatisation program has thus, in just a few years, brought more than 10 billion USD, or 70 billion francs, into the French economy. The shareholder is especially affected by the nationalisation movements, as the government must decide the level of compensation paid to shareholder firms. However, no shares would be bought if the government made an attempt to set price above expected market value, thus raising concerns of the profitability of nationalisation. In the nationalisation of Qantas, its integral structure would be changed, thus enforcing Qantas shareholders to adapt to an economical dilemma of the destruction of share value. 51% of the Australian population are shareholders. These are not just the elitist, but rather regular civilians like you and I. The nationalisation of Qantas would impact all of these individuals and their economic statuses. Nationalisation policies are often quick to sacrifice economic efficiency for potential short-term political advantages. There is concern that the government's motive to utilise Qantas for government benefit, which may not exist in the best interest of the airline itself. There is a misconception in the sense of security the government perpetuates, and it is a fallacy to synonymously associate government-owned with stable and safe. This can be seen in the Australian government's robo-debt, where they had to owe the public over $1.8 billion in refunds, with the Labour government referring to it as a human tragedy. Furthermore, the healthcare crisis and ambulance ramping identifies the inability of the Australian government to have a productive and effective service sector. Furthermore, research published by Bax et al. And Al-Jafars identified the introduction of private airlines as improving the efficiency of the sector, with the National Bureau of Economic Research creating a mathematical model of nationalised and privatised businesses that support this idea. Hence, by keeping Qantas in private hands, we ensure that it remains an agile, innovative and well-positioned to navigate the ever-evolving aviation industry. Let us not mistake the idea of nationalisation as a solution, but rather recognise it as a potential setback to the process we've achieved. Qantas, now and for the future, will be thriving globally, and let's do this under flourishing the private sector. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Cadence Butterfield.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadence and I'll be the second affirmative speaker for today's debate. The topic for this afternoon is that in light of recent events, the government should re-nationalise Qantas, a statement that we as the affirmative team wholeheartedly agree with. Before moving on to my own case for this afternoon, I would like to consider the arguments that the first negative speaker has attempted to convince you of. To begin with, I would like to address the definition. We accept the amendments that the first negative speaker has made to the definition because we do not believe they necessarily change the course of this debate. Furthermore, the 2014 amendment bill that she brought to your attention, we do not believe that it was necessary to include, given that most Qantas scandals had occurred after the start of the pandemic. This first negative speaker has told you that Qantas has seen huge profits since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. However, she conveniently failed to mention that this extra money generated significantly from the illegal sacking of 1,700 employees and the selling of fake tickets, as my first speaker has stated. I would now like to recap the case that was previously made by my team. My first speaker discussed how the renationalisation of Qantas can restore our tourism industry and promote economic growth. She then talked about how a state-owned airline can effectively facilitate more environmental responsibility and public accountability of Qantas. Today, I will be discussing with you 2 points. The renationalising Qantas mitigates the risks of foreign influences that may not prioritise Australia, and how it could preserve the strong connection Qantas has to our country. Next, I will argue how a nationalised airline plays a significant role in safeguarding our national interests, as this has done in other countries. My first point for this afternoon is that a state-owned Qantas ultimately allows for the needs of Australia to be met and promotes our national identity. This is achieved through 2 key avenues: by mitigating foreign influence that does not consider what is best for Australia, but also by ensuring the maintenance of Qantas's strong connection to our country as a symbol of our national identity. By law, Qantas is required for at least 51% of its ownership to be Australian-based, which is currently met, but only at its minimum, meaning that 49% of the company is owned by foreign investors. Furthermore, of Qantas's top 10 shareholders, only 5 of them are Australian, with the other half being split between companies based in Norway, the UK, and the USA. Now, although their ownership portions may seem relatively small, all under 2%, these are still vast sums in terms of valuation, between $29 and $120 million each, according to Market Screener. These are significant numbers, meaning that foreign investors and companies from countries that are more wealthy than Australia can ultimately make decisions that impact not only the success or failure of Qantas as a company, but also the economy of Australia as a whole. This is known as the Foreign Direct Investment Spillover Effect, or the FDI spillover. This refers to when occurrences in one country have impacts on the economy of another one, typically one that is less wealthy. Moreover, FDI refers to an ownership stake made by a company or investor of one country, which grants them influence over an enterprise in another. The negative effects of spillover are most significant when considering the largest shareholder in Qantas, the American investment company known as the Vanguard Group. Now, although the Vanguard Group has a solid reputation as a leading company for long-term investments and mutual funds, it is extremely important to consider the implications of an Australian-based company being influenced by American investors, especially considering the scandals that the Vanguard Group have been involved in. Since 2020, the Vanguard Group have been fined for overstating projected yields and projected annual income, and also for appearing in errors of over 8 million customer account statements, as stated in an article by Reuters. Given the Vanguard Group is not Australian, when making decisions, they do not have to make them for the good of our country, but can make them solely for the good of Qantas. This can have a significant impact on Australians in multiple ways, including the fact that the national brand and identity of Qantas cannot be ensured when the company is not owned by our government. Not only is Qantas our country's largest airline by fleet and the flag carrier of Australia, but it is also the second oldest operating airline in the world. This demonstrates the long-standing reputation Qantas has as an iconic symbol of Australia. If the government were to re-nationalise Qantas, it can ensure that the airline remains a symbol of our national identity and a source of pride for Australians around the world. Not only this, but the maintenance of Qantas's connection to our country and economy allows the government to ensure continued control over our reputation on the global stage. My second argument for today is that in re-nationalising Qantas, we are ensuring that the national interests of Australia are protected. As a domestic and international airline, Qantas is an essential pillar of Australia's infrastructure and sovereignty. Especially given our geographical distance compared to the rest of the world, a national airline is crucial for ensuring the connectivity within the nation and the rest of the globe. There have been various cases around the world in which government-owned airlines have served vital roles in the safeguarding of national interests, given they act as strategic assets that can be swiftly mobilised to assist in emergency responses, but also because they serve as diplomacy and influence, and can facilitate negotiations between governments to allow them to achieve attractive international agreements. As I've said, there are countless cases in which government-owned airlines have played significant roles in the protection of national interests, geopolitically, socially, and economically, including countries such as Israel, Canada, and the Netherlands. However, the key example that I would like to bring to your attention today is Emirates, the national airline of the UAE. The Emirates airline has had a significant impact on the UAE, specifically on the economy and the identity of Dubai. Dubai is one of the richest cities in the world and is renowned globally as a tourist and business destination, and its constant success is largely due to the growth of the Emirates airline. The aviation sector is a crucial pillar of the UAE's economy, accounting for more than 27% of Dubai's GDP, which is equal to $26.7 billion US, according to Oxford Economics. Emirates has also played a significant role in facilitating high-level negotiations, diplomatic visits, and trade missions. Ultimately, these countries all show clearly the success that a nationalised airline can bring to a country from an economic, geopolitical, and humanitarian perspective, and how re-nationalising Qantas back here in Australia is an opportunity that can allow our country growth and competitiveness. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the Affirmative team, undoubtedly believe that in light of recent events, the Australian government should absolutely re-nationalise Qantas. In doing so, we ensure that decisions made regarding the airline will be made by Australians for Australians. As a country, we need to prioritise people over profits. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Spiridon Spilopoulos.
Good afternoon, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for today's debate is that in light of recent events, the government should re-nationalise Qantas. We, the negative team, strongly believe that this statement is false. As the second speaker today, I'll speak to you about 2 points. How the nationalisation restricts competition in the industry, which can stifle innovation and drive prices up, and how Qantas is profitable and therefore there is no reason to nationalise it to cause unnecessary losses. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the definition by the Affirmative team. However, the 2014 bill changed the structure of Qantas and their international reach and profit. Politicians across both parties acknowledged nationalisation within the bill's debate. And this brings me on to my rebuttal. I would like to point out some flaws in the opposition's argument. The second Affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that the nationalisation of Qantas will promote national interest. This is wrong because although national interest may be improved, this doesn't change the fact of the economic consequences of nationalisation. As my first speaker has already explained, and I will further speak to you today, it is economically unfeasible. This national interest does not explain why a profitable company such as Qantas entering a new beginning alongside new CEO Vanessa Hudson is worthy of nationalisation. Furthermore, with record-breaking profit of $2.4 billion in May of 2023, Qantas is profitable and consideration of nationalism is absurd. To emphasise a quote by Malcolm Turnbull in the 2014 bill debate, "I know that a government that is serious cannot be governed by nostalgia and sentiment. It cannot be governed by emotion. It must be governed by the hard realities of the challenges that we face." And this brings me on to my first point, that nationalisation can affect innovation of an airline. As my first speaker has already explained, with fewer significant competitors, the market becomes less competitive and airlines can have less incentive to offer competitive pricing and services to passengers. According to a report by the European Commission in 2016, increased competition is positively correlated with higher levels of innovation in industries. Companies facing competitive pressures are more inclined to invest in research to develop and maintain market share. This is also supported by the fact that the Global Innovation Index consistently shows that countries within competitive markets rank higher in terms of innovation. This innovation in Qantas is seen in examples such as the 2022 Group Fleet Renewal Program, which states that Qantas expects the delivery of a new aircraft every 3 weeks for the next 3 years. If Qantas is to be nationalised, this reduction in competition is explained, as my first speaker, would reduce the innovation due to lack of competition. The airline industry in the United States provides a compelling case study for this, where after deregulation in 1978, which introduced competition and allowed airlines to set their fares, airlines competed by introducing new services, improving safety standards, and adopting advanced technologies to attract passengers. This competition led to innovations such as the online booking system, frequent flyer programs, and improved in-flight entertainment options. Airlines have developed to become more efficient and investing in sustainable practices that introduce new passenger experiences as a result of this privatisation. Furthermore, by implementing these protectionist policies that are inevitable with renationalisation, not only is this innovation compromised, but further international ties with investors. For example, according to The Conversation in 2022, the recent restriction with Qatar will cost the Australian economy about $1 billion in losses per year due to tourism, VRF, which is visiting friends and relatives, and business travel. However, in reality, this figure is actually much greater due to other international ties with Qantas that would be reduced due to the renationalisation. And this brings me on to my second point. The Australian government should not renationalise Qantas since Qantas is a profitable company. According to The Guardian, in May of 2023, Qantas delivered a record-breaking $2.47 billion in profit. And this shows how, in its current state, Qantas is flourishing and profitable. Qantas is a significant player in the global aviation industry and has demonstrated its ability to compete effectively. Nationalisation would be unwarranted and would disrupt the company's operations and hinder its ability to remain competitive globally. A statement from Qantas in 2023 showed that by the end of June, Qantas plans to increase its domestic capacity beyond pre-pandemic levels and increase international capacity by up to 81%. With a consistent track record of financial success despite unprecedented challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic, Qantas has demonstrated its resilience and ability to navigate complex economic landscapes. Renationalisation of Qantas would not only jeopardise its financial stability, but also hinder its capacity for innovation and global collaboration. This will limit the consumer choice and increase the burden on the taxpayers of Australia. This is further reinforced by a quote from The Economist, which states that if airlines were to be nationalised, fares are estimated to be 3 to 5% higher. According to recent data from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the presence of multiple airlines in the market has been a driving force for reduced cost, where over the past decade, airfares on domestic routes have decreased by a massive 15%, making airfare more affordable for more Australians. The nationalisation of airlines will further serve as a catalyst for market distortion and change the structure of the competitiveness of the aviation industry. Nationalisation further presents concerns of fair competition, posing distortion that will be caused by change in competition. This pervasive role of government within the industry creates disputes in this idea of a stable market. Following events such as the pandemic, it's essential that the efficiency is maintained and competitiveness can be achieved in the global market. This is a feat which currently Qantas is comfortably reaching. In the sale for the privatisation of Qantas in the late 1990s, the airline was sold for a total of $2.1 billion, and 3 years later, Qantas shares were worth 49% more in which the government sold them for. This allowed the shareholders to receive a 160% return on investments. This privatisation continues to prove successful, with Qantas's air carrier brands earning $2,580 million post-COVID compared to its $1,501 million pre-COVID. With 65% of the Australian air carrier market share in April of 2022, Qantas saw a growth while Virgin Airlines saw a decrease. Hence, despite the recent events battled by Qantas, the company continues to grow and remain economically profitable. A private company during the pandemic, there was a creation of stronger financial position, enhanced ways of working and market growth, which would not have been possible under national ownership due to the significant strain based on all industries at the time. Maintaining Qantas as a private entity ensures that it continues to thrive, contribute to the Australian economy and offer travellers with diverse options, making it the preferred path for a vibrant and competitive aviation industry in Australia. So in conclusion, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we firmly believe that re-nationalising Qantas is unwarranted and detrimental to consumers and the Australian aviation industry. Thank you.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Ruben Visser.
Attention all. Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ruben and I'll be your third affirmative speaker. The topic of contention for this afternoon's debate is that in light of recent events, the government should re-nationalise Qantas. We, the affirmative team, wholeheartedly support the statements, and as my fellow Australians, you should too. Now, as the third speaker, I have a responsibility to summarise the entire affirmative team's arguments up until this point, but I also have a duty to dissuade you of any arguments the negative team may have entertained you with. With that in mind, fasten your seatbelts as we ascend into rebuttals. First, I'd like to start with the definition. As our second speaker had mentioned, we don't see the changes proposed by the negative team as impactful, but particularly, I want to focus on their amendment to 2014. We find 2014 as too far into the past and not in relation to the current scandals which Qantas has been slammed with. Next, I'd like to talk about an overarching idea within the negative team's argument. They've put forward that Qantas, under government control, will no longer be pushed to innovate, and that they are economically unviable for this point. First, I'd like to tell you why we need aviation in the first place, which perpetuates the need for innovation, and then I'll get to the options between the two types of aviation companies we can have. Firstly, we all know Australia is pretty much a massive rock surrounded by the world's greatest moat, the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Now, without any immediate neighbours, the only way to trade goods between two foreign countries is through seafaring or aviation. And although seafaring works great for your new IKEA desk, it doesn't quite work for perishable goods, which leads us to the need for an aviation company. Now, there are two options for an aviation company. You can either have an aviation company which handsomely pays its former CEO millions of dollars whilst illegally firing many of its employees in one of Australia's greatest corporate scandals, or you can have a public institution which not only makes profit but also uses that profit and re-injects it back into the community by funding education, healthcare, and many more public amenities. Which brings me into my second point, which is attacking this point the negative team alluded to, which is around like the cost of buying it back, and that it would be unaffordable for the government to really take on this project. However, realistically, they haven't considered the vastly superior benefit that investment in nationalisation will bring. Let's look at it from the point of raw numbers. To quote, the quoted net worth of Qantas as of this morning was 9.16 billion, as according to the ASX, that being the institution which oversees the purchasing and vending of shares in all listed businesses in Australia. Now for the second part of the equation, we turn to our first speaker, which highlighted Qantas's public acknowledgement of making record profits over 2 billion. This wasn't just our first speaker, their negative team also highlighted this. Starting all these figures into our equation, we see that it will take less than 5 years to publicly own Qantas at the rate it makes profit per annum if we only use the profits generated by Qantas exclusively, no other sources of income. Take, for instance, that even if Qantas only profited $1 billion, less than 50% of its current, adjusting for inflation, interest, and projected economic growth, it would only take about a decade to publicly own Qantas again. Now, although that may seem like a decent commitment, 10 years is nothing in the face of future in which the public can enjoy the fruit of their labour with another source of revenue, bringing funding to education, healthcare, and infrastructure, among other public amenities. The first speaker tried to tell you that Qantas was seeing record-breaking profits, and this was a point elaborated on by the second speaker as well. Yet they have conveniently forgotten to mention the great amount of employees that have been illegally sacked, as there has been a continuous theme within the affirmative arguments, that of 1,700 being fired across the country, not only affecting them, but their families' livelihoods. As a final thought, before I go on to the summary, the negative team has focused a lot on the profits and the positives of Qantas, but have conveniently forgotten about all the scandals which have driven Qantas's profitability into the ground. Comparing its stock price from early in August to now, we can see an 18% decrease in share value prices. So is Qantas really that profitable? And how much longer can they keep up this facade? I'd now like to mention we are moving into a comfortable cruising altitude over the summary. Our first affirmative speaker, Conan, illuminated that renationalising Qantas, that they would ensure economic stability and job preservation. She explained that there would be a 50% increase in air passenger growth rate, which leads to an average increase of 3.2% in annual growth of per capita income and a 5.5% increase in the annual rate of employment. In her second point, she highlighted that the renationalisation of Qantas would force the company to take accountability for its decisions and actions. She pointed out in the recent High Court ruling that which unanimously rejected Qantas' sacking of over 1,700 staff across 10 airports in Australia in a bid to increase profit over people. I mean, talk about corporate greed, right? Not only was it the biggest illegal sacking in Australian corporate history, the company was forsaken by its former CEO, Alan Joyce, in its most trying time since privatisation. While not without an inexcusably large golden parachute of $21.4 million, whilst his company saw an 18% decrease in share value and still plummeting. Renationalising will force accountability and work to regain the confidence of the people for our national carrier. Following on from her argument, our second affirmative speaker, Cadence, discussed the potential risks involved when foreign investors have large ownership share and thus influence on the decisions made by a company in another country. She talked about how these governments renationalising Qantas will allow for these risks to be mitigated, and that it would also ensure the maintenance of the brand that Qantas contributes to our national identity, and the importance of maintaining a strong connection to our oldest running airline. Her second point discussed how a nationalised airline can help a country travel great lengths in terms of protecting its national interests. She gave examples of the United Arab Emirates and how its nationalised airlines have made significant contributions to the country's economy and geopolitical position, but also putting in significant work in emergency response and humanitarian aid. So, as we dissent, ladies and gentlemen, we, the affirmative team, wholeheartedly believe, due to the inexcusable, recent, abhorrent behaviour exhibited by Qantas and its executive board, that the Australian government must unquestionably renationalise the exploitative aviation enterprise that used to be our national carrier. As a country, we need to put profits below people. Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Luca Shin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for today's debate is that in light of recent events, the government should re-nationalise Qantas. As the negative team, we believe that this statement is undeniably false. As the third speaker, I will be addressing the blatant flaws in the opposition's argument and summing up our team's case. I would like to start by addressing the arguments of the first opposition speaker. They stated that recently Qantas's rural engagement has gone down and have resorted to simply investing in expensive international ventures while not looking at our domestic situations. However, they have quoted 2022 stats, which are not representative of current events and Qantas's newly defined goals. As of 2023, Qantas plans to dedicate equal spendings on domestic travel and international travel. Furthermore, Qantas is no longer an exclusively domestic/rural traveling airline, so they must inevitably increase flights internationally to compete in the global market, which has a flow effect to improve our economy. Now, flight services such as Rex have already been established recently to focus on rural flights. They continue to address the controversy of fake flights, or ghost flights as the news have called it. However, I would like to point out that these are still allegations under investigation. However, assuming that this is true, we can see this simply as a result that was required in a black swan event such as the COVID-19 pandemic. There is now a clear shift in Qantas's view of customer service under new management, as I'll be elaborating on further. They stated that under government ownership, there would be better management. There was a situation a few years ago where a company ruined the lives of 443,000 Australians by poor and illegal management of funds, unlawfully gaining $300 million from impoverished and socially disenfranchised individuals, resulting in suicides and mistreatment of disabled people. Ladies and gentlemen, this was in fact not a private company. It was the Australian government's scandalous robo-debt scheme. This is a clear-cut example of how the government is certainly not immune from atrocious management and illegal activity. On top of mathematical evidence put forward by our first speaker that government-owned companies are less efficient, it is clear that renationalisation is not the solution to real issues faced by Qantas today. They also addressed that Qantas's public view and reputation have declined in the recent years. Although this is true, it is in Qantas's best interest as a private company to work in the consumer's best interests and work towards improving public reputation. We can see this clearly from Qantas's change in goals from its new management under CEO Vanessa Hudson, who is committed to improving the reputation of Qantas. From Qantas's new annual report released only 3 days ago, where Qantas has decided to base executive income on consumer satisfaction. Furthermore, they have withheld all executive bonuses, and the board commits to working to withhold up to 14.4 million Australian dollars from Alan Joyce's bonus package, which they alluded to multiple times in their case. This indicates a clear dedication of Qantas to improving customer satisfaction. On the contrary, there is less incentive for government-run institutions to work fully for the consumer. As our first speaker stated, renationalisation gives Qantas an unfair competitive advantage, which decreases competition and encourages the development of a monopoly. Monopolies stifle innovation, customer support, and have a direct impact on the economy. The second affirmative speaker attempted to rebut our first negative speaker's case by stating that huge profits from illegal sackings and fake tickets, huge profits were a result of illegal sackings and fake tickets. Addressing the bad treatment of workforce that have been present in Qantas, the government isn't necessarily void of employment mistreatment and mass job layoffs. This year, the Victorian government laid off 5,000 public servants, which is 10% of the total government workforce, despite a vacancy of jobs, despite not enough jobs in health and education, citing budget concerns. Union members were outraged, however, nothing has been done. Qantas has already been held accountable by the Transport Workers Union and the federal courts, and huge amounts of compensation have been paid as needed. It is also important to know that although Qantas's actions were unlawful, the laying off of workers was inevitable in a pandemic that was unprecedented to all, and Qantas commits to bringing back employment of domestic workers. Combank, which was privatised with Qantas in 1991, was fined $700 million from Austrac due to money laundering, as well as Westpac, but there are no calls for re-nationalisation. Why? Because the government knows that private institutions such as Combank and Qantas play a vital role in the economy, and that nationalisation have been shown to fail in solving these problems historically and in the context of Australia's economic system and cultural precedent. They also raised a statistic that somehow 49% of Qantas is owned by foreign investors. This is completely false. According to Qantas's foreign investment portfolio this year, only 23% was foreign-owned. Foreign investment in Qantas is exaggerated, and foreign investment is advantageous to Australia. This means the great majority of shareholders are based in Australia and act in Australia's national interests. In today's globalised world, foreign relations and trade is indispensable for a nation's success. This is especially the case for aviation. As our second speaker spoke about, just looking at the Qatar Airways debacle this year, where the government blocked additional flights from Qatar in favour of Qantas, economists have estimated most conservatively a loss of $1 billion every year in economic damage and lost income. It is clear that if Qantas is renationalised, this type of protectionist policy and unfair favouring of homegrown airlines will result in further economic damage. The second speaker also spoke about the Emirates airline. Although we recognise the success of Emirates Airline, which is a state-owned corporation, it is under a completely different government and completely different economic structure, as it is a constitutional monarchy with the hereditary emir who has control over all legislative and executive decisions. This is clearly completely different to Australia's system. Our first speaker, Serafina, spoke about the inherent instability of renationalisation, the detrimental impact on Qantas as a company, as well as its shareholders, and the misconception that governments are prosperous and safe. Our second speaker, Spiridon, has established that renationalisation restricts innovation and how Qantas is profitable so will not benefit from nationalisation. Ladies and gentlemen, our team has put forward a most logical and clear case that Qantas will most certainly not benefit from renationalisation by the government. Today, we live in an interconnected global society, and our nation's prosperity depends on our participation. Consider the catastrophe that will be put upon the people of Australia and our economy if Qantas is nationalised. We cannot afford it. We do not need it. We do not want it. Thank you.
I call upon a representative of the Adjudication panel to come forward and award the debate.
Firstly, congratulations on both teams on making it to the grand final. Overall, this debate was very high quality and both teams should be congratulated for their performance here today. Today, as you will have noticed, the debate was adjudicated by a panel of 5 adjudicators. And I can announce that by a split decision of 3-2, the panel has awarded the debate today to the Affirmative team. Congratulations. Chairman, I'll hand it back to you for the votes, please.
I call upon a member of the runner-up team to give a vote of thanks.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, for taking your time on this Saturday to come watch us. Very cool venue. Thank you, Aberfoyle. I love you guys. You guys did so good. Absolutely amazing debate. Couldn't have asked for a better opponent, honestly. Congratulations so much on the win. Thank you to the chairman and the timekeeper for coming here today, and thank you very much.
I call upon a member of the winning team to second that vote of thanks.
Like Serafina said, thank you to everyone for coming out and singing tonight. Obviously, for people from Aberfoyle, it's a bit of a trek. Thank you to all the adjudicators and the chairman and the timekeeper for facilitating today. And really, we couldn't have asked for a better opponent. Like you said, you guys, both times we've voted this year, you've been absolutely amazing. So, congratulations. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. I now declare this debate closed.